strategies to deal with rising fertilizer costs. Anyone notice things cost a little more than they did 2 years ago? Coping with high input costs. These prices are about a month old. Maybe a few things have come down. It depends what area you're in, but UAN $1.06 per unit of N, urea 90 cents per unit, anhydrous 87 cents, DAP 903 or 930 a ton. By the way, these are national retail averages. MAP 986, 0060, $862 a ton. Yeah, that's dramatically higher than it was 2 years ago. It's higher than it was a year ago now, but if you recall, prices kept escalating through the spring, and it's actually less than they were at the peak. So do you have your money lined up for operating this year? This guy went to see Rich at Flanagan Bank. Now he's all set to put in a crop. So, what do we do in light of the high input prices? We want to increase our nutrient use efficiency. So things we talked about earlier, managing air and water in the soil. That's still number one. That gives an environment for the microbes to work in. That will do more than anything to improve your nutrient use efficiency. Residue management, again, recycling the nutrients from last year's crop residue. Fertilizer timing and placement, we talked about banding and the 4 R's, or as Dr. Heininger mentioned, the 5 R's, and then increase biology, especially nitrogen fixers. Nitrogen is high priced now. So residue management, here's an important concept, especially if you're growing corn or another grass crop. If we have a carbon to nitrogen ratio that's 30 to 1 or greater, its nutrients are immobilized or tied up. It's actually pulling energy out of the system, and it's going to rob from the crop. However, if we have a carbon to nitrogen ratio that's 15 to 1 or less, we have nutrient release, mineralization. So crops can take off and grow in that environment. So it's extremely important to think about that when you're managing residue and cover crops. We have several examples, and it's been talked about today, to set up to grow a corn crop. Get that decay process started early, get that carbon to nitrogen ratio narrowed up so that corn crop's ready to go and can take off. So again, we showed this slide earlier, nutrient recycling with the fall residues application. This is a grower in Northwest Illinois. He used 4 gallons of MT17, which we really haven't talked about much today. It's a biological product similar to MVP, but it's geared for improving efficiency of manure applications. And he put the residues powder on with that. So here on the right, that's a picture of the soil in his bean field where he had a 180 bushel corn crop the year before, organic corn. And the only tillage he did was 1 light disking. And you can see that residue's pretty well gone. He did the same thing in his bean stubble where he planted corn, and you can see how granulated that surface is. That is all worm castings. The residue's gone and the surface is just literally covered with worm castings. So very healthy soil environment. So again, consider banding fertility. If we want to be more efficient, we can get by with less total applied nutrients. So spoon feeding the crop, especially in applied nutrients closer to when the crop needs them, especially your mobile nutrients, things that tend to leach out, nitrogen, sulfur, boron, things like that. So again, opportunities we have for banding would be in furrow, a 2x2 starter, side dress, strip till, and then grow more biology. So this is a grower in Bureau County, and he was always trying to get higher yields, and he'd ask his local fertilizer dealer, what do I need to do to get my yields up? Put on more fertilizer. You put on more fertilizer, the yields didn't go up. What do I need to do? Keep putting on more fertilizer. Nothing happened. So he got frustrated. He started working for us, with us. For the last 5 years, he's done a program like this. He's used no dry fertilizer. In furrow, he's going 2 gallons of MVP, 5 gallons of 421-4 with an in-furrow trace package. Then he comes back and Y-drops the rest of his nitrogen with 5.5 gallons of KTS, potassium thiosulfate. That's a 002517. 2.5 gallons of MT17 for a biological, water, more trace pack, more boron, and a little bit of sugar to feed the microbes here. And yeah, he's used no dry fertilizer for 5 years, but now his yields are going up. He's a pretty happy camper. So this past year, we had a lot of guys that were seeking to grow crops with less nitrogen. In some cases, it was due to economics, just because of the high price of nitrogen. And we had a lot of organic growers a year ago could not get manure, so they're looking for alternatives. So here's some factors that play in with nitrogen management. Crop rotation. Certainly if we're growing corn after a legume crop, especially like clover or alfalfa, there's a chance to significantly save on nitrogen inputs. Cover crops, if we can get legume crops in between cash crops, sometimes we can grow some nitrogen that way and cut back on our inputs. Residue management, we talked about that. Pay attention to carbon to nitrogen ratios. Variety selection. Some varieties take more nitrogen than other varieties. Some need the nitrogen up front, some need it later in the season. So that's something your seed dealer will have to guide you with. Then planting date. As a general rule, it's going to take more nitrogen if we're planting in April than it is the first week of June. So just another factor to keep in mind. You know, the longer that nitrogen's out there, the more chance there is for leaching. And then certainly weather and rainfall. If we have an ideal year, get just the right amount of moisture, we can be very efficient. But we need to be prepared for those years where it doesn't quit raining in May and June, and it's going to take more nitrogen than usual to grow a good yield. So be prepared for Plan B to come back in and add some nitrogen. Then soil management we've touched on. Again, managing air and water. Most of our nitrogen fixing organisms need an aerobic environment. And then using N fixers. That is microbes that actually fix nitrogen from the air and make it available to the plant. And we'll talk more about that. This is a grower at Manitou, Illinois, sandy soil southwest of Peoria along the Illinois River, where they grow a lot of specialty crops. He had grown organic soybeans the fall before. He had a cereal rye cover crop. His plan was to put on chicken manure, come back and plant organic popcorn. Well, he called me March 1st. I can't get any chicken manure. What do I do? How do I grow popcorn? I said, well, you're on sandy soil. It's still early. Plant a cover crop of forage peas. Let them grow and fix nitrogen, terminate them, and plant your popcorn. So that's what he did. At planting time, he used 3 gallons of the MVP along with the myco seed treatment. He did do a foliar, 2 gallons of MVP and Nutritia N. Nutritia N is one of those end-of-fight biologicals that can fix up to 40 units of nitrogen in the right conditions. He did put on a mix through the pivot that got another 5 pounds of nitrogen and more MVP. So really the total applied nitrogen to the crop was 5.2 pounds. The rest all came from the cover crop and from biology. And this picture's taken August 23rd, and you can see that corn is green as can be, clear to the ground. So he was not lacking nitrogen. So that impressed me that he was able to do that with very little purchased nitrogen. So here's the picture of the forage peas growing as a cover crop. So 2 ton of dry matter has the potential to provide 140 pounds of nitrogen. And this is John Daniels' area, northeast Ohio. He says if they plant it by April 15th, they should be ready to plow down May 20th to 25th. So that's going to vary, depending on your location. But if you have the chance to get them seeded in early spring, it is a potential to really grow some of your own nitrogen and cut back significantly on purchased nitrogen. So we want to inoculate them so that those nodules are actively fixing nitrogen, because that's the benefit we're looking for. So again, growing your own nitrogen with rotation and cover crops. Some other cover crops that help fix nitrogen: clover, sunset red clover, red clover. This is Melvin Van Clay's field. He's actually here now. He was getting ready to grow organic popcorn also, and he's on light sandy soils in northwest Indiana. And it was following, you had, clover cover crop out there the year before, but he used a modest rate of chicken litter, 3,000 pounds. So he's not getting a terrible amount of nitrogen from the chicken litter, but he did apply the litter, put on 250 pounds each of lime and gypsum, again trying to provide soluble calcium so the microbes would have a good home to live in and function in. With the planter, he put on 3 gallons of MVP and then used a 20 gallon per acre mix in a 2x2 that provided some nitrogen and micronutrients. He used the myco seed treat. Then I talked about the MT17, the product that's supposed to capture more value from manure. So he came back after planting and put on 7 gallons of the MT17 biological, and then that gets rotary hoed or tine harrowed in. And this picture's August 11th, and you can see here, again, we're not lacking for nitrogen, and he grew a good popcorn crop. We had an Iowa grower that, again, was limited on the amount of manure he had. He got 30 pounds of nitrogen from the manure. In furrow, he used the 3 gallons of MVP, 3 gallons of N-Force, that's at 8% amino acid nitrogen. He came back and did 2 foliars, one at V4, one at V8, using more MVP and N-Force, and then at V8, the Nutrition or Blue N, again, endophyte, nitrogen fixing organism that can fix up to 40 pounds of nitrogen. And he grew 166 bushel corn per acre on that program. 90 acres of that was after soybeans and 40 acres was corn after corn. So I thought that was a pretty good overall yield for no more nitrogen input that he had. Then Missouri grower got 60 pounds of nitrogen from manure, 2 tons of pullet litter. In furrow, he used the MVP and N-Force again. Came back with a foliar, 2 gallons of MVP, 3 gallons of N-Force, and 5 ounces of the Blue N. Grew 140 bushel corn in a very tough growing season, and it handled the hot, dry conditions better than other fields in the area. The good areas of the field were making 200 bushels per acre, but this is a smaller field with a lot of trees around the fence line and areas that really help drag the overall yield down. So again, very successful on limited manure input.
Yeah, so this is from northwest Minnesota up by Grand Forks. And of course, in that part of the world, they don't have a lot of extra days, so every day counts. But this grower, he's trying to get away from or reduce his dependence, reliance upon the chicken litter. So just to show you his kind of transition from that, in 2021, he ran 3 or 4 ton an acre of chicken litter. He ran, of course, a seed treat, like a seed treat, and then an in-furrow of BioAid, which is a dry soluble microbial, as long as a gallon of fish. And it came back with a foliar of 2 more gallons of fish. Pretty simple at that point. As he knew he wanted to cut back on the manure, in 2022, he ran 1.7 ton of litter, so cut it in about half, and then did residues the fall of 2021. Then ran his seed treatment, did his in-furrow, he increased the fish to another 2 gallons, came back with a broadcast of dry Nature Safe, which that's like a feather meal, blood meal type product, 1300, and then did a foliar at V6 up to V10 of fish, plus add a little bit of more of a soluble blood meal to that. And he found in doing so, he cut his manure input by half, but yet maintained yields that he typically gets up there in that 150, 175 bushel organic corn range, which in that part of the world in Grand Forks is doing pretty darn good. His plan for this coming year, now saying, okay, well, let's try to cut it back even a little more, down to 1 ton an acre of chicken litter this past fall, did residues on all the acres, considering doing the MT17 here in the spring, and then still doing, of course, the seed treatment, doing the in-furrow, adding a Y-drop application of fish along with some Chilean nitrate and a little bit of the Nature Safe, pretty small amount there. And even these rates really aren't very much. 30 or 50 pounds of Chilean nitrate, 5 pounds of the Nature Safe, pretty small amounts. Then broadcast, still of more of the Nature Safe, coming back with a foliar. So, the amounts aren't all that important necessarily, just the idea of we're going away from relying on, I'm just going to dump on a whole bunch of manure and call it good, to more of a spoon feeding approach and putting in biology every step of the way, along with kind of targeted nutrients and things. So just examples of what can be done. We showed this a little bit earlier, John Daniel's plot with the starter and that. So just to reinforce that if we're going to look at where our budget is and where we want to spend our dollars, to me, we got to spend it at the start. We got to get that crop off to a good start. and to do a seed treatment and to inoculate it and then to do a starter of some kind still returns the biggest kind of dollars for the investment that's there. Another interesting fact with this particular plot is in doing their checks, they're harvesting a particular length, of field. And this is an Amish situation, so it's kind of hand harvesting situation. But they pulled all the ears from that row for X number of feet, and then they pulled all the ears from the check. And in looking at them, found that there were more moldy ears in the check than there were where there was the starter. And not only more ears that have mold on them, but these have a greater degree of mold than what these do up here. So pretty dramatic difference there. And it's not just about yield necessarily, but it's about quality too, and health, and what we get at the end of the season. So which would we rather feed to our livestock? The top ones or the bottom ones? And actually, not just what we see here, but all the other years they harvested did not have mold at all. So there were a lot more of those in the treated. They also run silage plots, and this goes back to a little bit of what Stephen was showing too. It's not just about tonnage necessarily, but it's about the quality of that we're taking off. That applies to silage as well. So it pays back in more ways than just the yield if we create a better feed that goes through our livestock and is more efficient and takes less than total silage to get that milk out of that cow, right? Or those pounds of beef. Here's a soybean plot. We kind of mentioned that a little bit earlier. This was just from this past year, and here about 5 bushel, but other times we've seen that kind of 3 to 5 bushel. On beans, a lot of folks, we say, oh, you don't need starter on beans, you just plant them, right? Well, it can still pay, it can still help. And biology still plays an important role there. We've mentioned Utrisha and the Blue N. These are nitrogen fixing products. I want to reinforce that where we have seen the biggest payback from these products has been on small grains and also potentially grass. But on wheat, oats, barley, things like that. Of course, that's a nice field of wheat here in Indiana. This is a plot that Tom Biesecker back there did a year ago, or a year and a half ago now. I got 9 bushel more out of doing the Blue N and a foliar. And I don't think I have a slide for it, but one of John Daniel's customers also did a check on oats and got 15 bushel. Went from 100 to 115 bushel on oats using either Blue N or what is now called Utrisha N. Both those products are really the same thing. Yes, sir?
Is that product organic? Is that
Yeah, these are OMRI listed. Yep,
okay.
You bet. Yep. And yes, some folks have checked it on, we showed a couple of examples, in corn where, maybe that plant didn't need more nitrogen, so it didn't show an advantage. But I just want to say that in the small grains, we seem to see pretty consistently where it provides something. Part of that, I think, has to do with the timing, because in a small grain, well, it needs nitrogen, right when that thing breaks dormancy in the spring and wants to start growing. Well, how much nitrogen do you get out of the soil in March? The ground's still cold, but yet the wheat wants to start growing. So if we can do a foliar and get a lot of good beneficial biology, as well as a few nutrients to stimulate it and get it going, that's the time that plant really needs it when it can't get it yet out of the soil. So that's where I think that really pays off. Another product that's similar to this that we're starting to look at as well is not organic at this time, called Bosphenom. In this case, it has endophytes that fix both nitrogen and then also one that solubilizes phosphorus. So kind of 2 approaches in one there. And here they have seed treatment options, also in furrow, and as well as foliar. So there's multiple ways to put it on too. So on the conventional side, we think that really has a home is a good product, and we're trying to watch that real closely. This is an example of just kind of what a foliar can do. And as we look at being efficient with our dollars, and we get to summertime and like, okay, do I put more into this crop or do I not? Well, in this case, this was over toward Columbus, Ohio. And here, July 14th, the beans had 3.5 inches of rain. They turned yellow, looked like they were dying, probably getting Pythium and Rhizoc and different diseases setting in, all that. So then our dealer prescribed a foliar of this whole package. And you have, of course, biology, the MVP, you have a little fish, then a EF400, it's an organic fungicide, backstops an organic bactericide, as well as Oro Boost, which helps a foliar penetrate the leaf, go into the plant better, SPE 120, which is a Bavaria Bassiana product, and then magnesium sulfate. And what the magnesium sulfate, that's like Epsom salts, it's almost like a little punch of instant energy to that plant. And oftentimes the plant is actually deficient in magnesium, even though there's plenty in the soil. So he did that foliar and then came back August 19th, and wow, look at the field, it turned around. So he was questioning himself back in July, like, do I put something into this crop or not? Or do I just write it off? Well, it was organic food grade beans. He had a good contract. He didn't want to just lose it and forget it. So he put the money into the foliar, invested that, and really got a 45 bushel organic food grade yield out of it, and some pretty nice looking beans. Yes, John?
He called me later and said after he sold the beans, he ended up with 49 bushels, so he was pretty conservative.
My slide's wrong. It only says 45. Yeah.
Yeah, he had
it's 49.
49 bushels then after
Yeah.
selling the beans. That was a conservative number.
And those were probably $30 beans somewhere,
A little more.
or better. Yeah. So he got the money back out of his foliar, I think. Yeah. So I'm going to hand it back to Ken now.
This goes back a few years ago. We had a Nebraska grower that was putting on liquid with the planter, organic. He was using 1 gallon of SP1 in his regular program. Again, today that would be MVP. 2 gallons of Dram 1 fish that has extra nitrogen in it, 2 gallons of pillar, and 5 gallons of a 3% nitrogen there. So he did half the field and he did alternating strips. On the other part, he added 15 gallons of SP1. And this was split between dribbled in the row and behind the closer. It had 2 tons of turkey compost on all of it. So 80 pounds of nitrogen coming from the compost. Planted at 22,000 population, some irrigation, had fairly heavy weed pressure. But where he added the 15 gallons of SP1, he got another 30 bushels per acre of corn. And then the plot clear back in 2012, this is an organic cornfield. The previous crop was alfalfa. It had liquid dairy manure applied over the winter. SP1 in furrow, no other products on the planter. So essentially his fertility was coming from the previous alfalfa crop and dairy manure. So he had rates of SP1, the control with none, 10 gallons and 20 gallons per acre. So 10 gallons of SP1 gave him nearly a 15 bushel boost, and 20 gallons gave him a 20 bushel boost. So even at 20 gallons per acre, that was economical. This was in 2012, which was a very dry year in northern Indiana. So pretty good yields there. Then here's kind of the ultimate story. Ray Rutger worked with us for years. He was a dealer and a rep in southern Indiana, but he traveled all over the country working with growers. On his own farm down at Boonville, close to Evansville, Indiana, he grew sweet corn on this spot for 5 years in a row. And his only input was 30 gallons per acre of SP1 with a little bit of molasses. So corn on corn, 5 years in a row. This is year 5. So no nitrogen inputs there. So we can do a lot if we have enough biology there. Got a case this past year from Carbondale, Illinois. This is not organic. They had a very hot, dry summer. They had many, many days over 90 degrees and several over 100. They were very dry at pollination time. He said his corn was rolled up when it was trying to pollinate. He thought he was headed for a disaster. He did put together a strong program. He used 8 gallons of MVP per acre total. 4 went on with the planter. He did a foliar with 2 gallons of K-Pack and 2 gallons of MVP. And he also put on 2 gallons of MVP at side dress. He harvested 160 bushel corn per acre, which he was extremely happy with considering the conditions. To best of his knowledge, the best corn other than his in the neighborhood was running 120. He said you go 5 miles away where they missed 1 shower and they were making 60 bushels per acre. So I mentioned the MT17 is designed to go on with the manure program to capture more value from the manure. And that's done to increase the fertility by accelerating decomposition, sequestering carbon, and building organic matter. So here's an example of a grower from Riverside, Iowa, close to Iowa City in 2020. In 2019, he had organic soybeans. He put on residues that fall along with 3 tons of chicken litter, 3 tons of goat pack. He also put on a ½ ton of gypsum to again provide the soluble calcium. So we're flocculating the soil, give the microbes a good home to work in. After that, he seeded a 9-way legume cover crop mix. So he really did a lot to set himself up for good yields in 2020. So May 1st, 2020, he made 1 pass with the field cultivator, planted 33,000. He broadcast the MT17 after planting and time harrowed it in. He harvested October 28th. So here's an example of the soil that's not treated. You see some clumps here. Here with the MT17 on, it's very well granulated, and you see less clods there, and even a darker color. And there's the roots from the corn plant with the treatment. Look how they're growing straight down. Lots of soil clinging to the roots. There's soil clinging down here. It looks like 8-10 inches deep, so that means he has an 8 to 10 inch aerobic zone, which is extremely good. So again, this is showing ammonia captured from the manure. With the MT17, we captured 73% of it and had another 17% more organic nitrogen that was captured from the manure. And then when it came to yield results, he's got a check here, Prairie Hybrid 6878, where he put on 5 gallons of caliber, that's the liquid calcium, plus 3 gallons of Dram S fish. It made 139. Where he didn't put that on, it made 131, so an 8 bushel increase from this application as a foliar. Where he added the MT17, the yield went up to 166 on one check, 171 on another check. So 40 bushel swing by adding the liquid calcium, the Dram S, and 7 gallons of MT17. A different hybrid then went 175. So it appears that the MT17 really captured more value from that NUR and translated into higher yields. With that, I'll turn it over to Monty.